I'm 85 years old, and my phone has been quiet for so long that the silence has started to feel like a sound of its own. It sits on the little table by my chair, face down, like something I'm ashamed to look at. Some days I still catch myself waiting for it to ring. And then I remember it doesn't ring for me anymore. Not for them. It's strange what you get used to. At first, the quiet felt temporary, like a bad week, like a misunderstanding, like everyone was busy. Now it feels like a decision that became permanent while I wasn't paying attention. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I don't even know what sympathy would do for me at this stage. I'm telling you because at 85 the truth arrives in a way it didn't when I was 45 or 55. It arrives without argument, without excuses, like a final letter slipped under the door. And the truth is this: my children didn't stop calling because they forgot about me. They stopped calling because I taught them how to live without me. That's a hard thing to say out loud. But it's the first honest thing I've said about it in years. I live alone now, small house, quiet street. The neighbors change every few years. You learn not to get attached. My wife Ruth has been gone 12 years. It still catches me off guard sometimes, the way the house doesn't make room for her anymore. The closet space is mine. The bathroom counter is mine. Even the air feels like it belongs to me. It's not a victory, it's not freedom. It's just what happens when people leave and you don't replace them. I wake up early. I don't need an alarm anymore. My body wakes me like a habit that doesn't know it's unnecessary. I sit up slowly because my back insists on being acknowledged. Then I shuffle into the kitchen and put water on for coffee. Even though I shouldn't have caffeine, it gives me something to do. A small ritual, proof that I can still take care of myself. After coffee, I sit by the window. I watch the street, the trees, the way the sunlight moves across the porch steps. I used to think old people did that because they were bored. Now I know it's because they're waiting for life to happen again. Some mornings, I pick up the phone and scroll through contacts like a man checking a locked door over and over. Their names are still there. My son Daniel, my daughter Melissa, even the old family group chat that went silent like a fire that ran out of wood. I tell myself I could call them. I've told myself that for years. But I know what happens if I do. It rings, it goes to voicemail. Or they answer politely, like I'm a distant relative. Like I'm someone they need to be decent to. Hi, Dad? Not oh, Dad, I'm so glad you called. Just, hi? There's a difference and you can feel it in your bones. So I usually don't call. I sit back down and I let another day go by because that's what I did when I was younger too. I let days go by. I let moments go by. I let people go by, believing they would circle back. I didn't understand back then that children don't circle forever. They move on. They grow up. They build lives. They become adults who remember what you did, not what you meant. If I rewind far enough, I can still see myself at 28. A young father. Hair dark, hands steady, shoulders strong. I worked at the plant then, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week when overtime was offered. It wasn't a glamorous job. It wasn't something you bragged about. But it paid. It was stable. It meant groceries were there, even if I came home too tired to taste them. I didn't drink much. I didn't run around. I wasn't cruel. I was, in my mind, a good man, a working man, a responsible man. I thought responsibility was love. I thought being tired was proof I cared. We lived in a modest house. The kind of house where the walls were thin and you could hear everything. The kids were little then. Melissa had this laugh that would fill the room, and Daniel used to follow me everywhere like a shadow. If I bent down to tie my boot, he'd kneel beside me like he had business there too. Ruth would watch us sometimes with this soft look on her face, like she was storing the scene away. I didn't store scenes away. I didn't think I needed to. I assumed they'd always be there. I remember getting home late one night and Melissa being half asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Ruth said she waited for me. Wanted to show me a drawing she made at school. Ruth held it up like it was important. I barely looked. I kissed Melissa's forehead and carried her to bed. I said, "That's nice, sweetheart." I thought that was enough. I thought being there at the end of the day counted, but I wasn't really there. I was always halfway somewhere else, halfway to tomorrow's shift, halfway to the bills, halfway to whatever came next. Even when I was home, I wasn't fully home. I sat at the table reading the paper, watching the news or staring at the television without seeing it. If the kids wanted to play, I'd say, "Not now, Daddy's tired." And I meant it, but they heard something else. They heard, "Not you." I didn't see it adding up. I didn't see it forming a pattern. You never do when you're living inside your own reasons. In my 30s, I got promoted supervisor. That meant different hours, more responsibility, and a kind of pressure that followed me home. I started carrying work like it was part of my spine. I talked about production numbers at dinner. I complained about employees who didn't care. Ruth would glance at the kids, like she was trying to pull them back into the room with her eyes. But the room was already changing. Melissa started spending more time in her bedroom. Daniel stopped asking me to throw the baseball. He'd ask Ruth instead. And I felt a strange relief, because it meant I could rest. I didn't understand that I was being removed from their hearts one small decision at a time. There were birthdays I missed. Not the whole day usually, but the important part. I'd come home after the cake, after the singing. They'd show me the gifts, the decorations. I'd say, "Looks great." And I'd think I'd done my part by showing up at all. There were school events I didn't go to because I was too busy. Plays, choir performances, parent nights. Ruth went. Ruth always went. She'd come home and tell me how Melissa stood on stage, nervous, gripping the edges of her dress, or how Daniel scored a goal and looked toward the crowd afterward, searching. "Did he look for me?" I asked once, half joking. Ruth didn't laugh. She said, "He looked for someone." That sentence has haunted me for years. At the time, I took pride in providing. We never went hungry. We had a reliable car. We had Christmas mornings where the tree was full. When the kids needed braces, they got braces. When they wanted to join sports, they joined sports. I told myself, see, this is love. But love isn't just paid for. Love is shown in ways money can't imitate. And my children learned early that if they wanted me, they needed an appointment. They needed to catch me in a good mood. They needed to be quick. I became a man you approach carefully, not because I was violent, but because I was absent in a way that still occupied space. When Melissa was around 14, she started talking less, not teenage sulking, something quieter, something heavier. She'd come home from school and go straight to her room. Ruth said she was struggling. One evening, Ruth asked me to talk to her. Just talk. I knocked on Melissa's door and stepped in. I saw posters on her wall, books on her floor, a world forming that I knew nothing about. I sat on her bed like a visitor. I asked, "How's school?" She shrugged. I asked, "Everything okay?" She said, "Yeah." I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have practice. I didn't have the muscle for emotional conversations. My father didn't talk. He worked. He came home. He ate. He slept. That was a man in my mind. So I stood up and said, "All right then." And I left. Ruth asked, "How did it go?" I said, "She's fine." And I believed that, or maybe I needed to believe it. When Daniel was 16, he got into an argument with me. I don't even remember what about. Something small. Curfew. Grades. Attitude. Teen things. I raised my voice. He raised his. For a moment I saw a man in him. Not a boy, and I didn't like it. I told him, "As long as you live under my roof." He cut me off and said, "It's not your roof. You're never even here." That hit me like a slap. I remember the room. The smell of dinner still in the air. Ruth standing between us like a wall. Daniel's face red, eyes wet but angry. Melissa watching from the hallway, arms crossed. I could have stopped. I could have said something honest. I could have admitted something. But I was proud. And pride is a quiet poison. It doesn't feel like hate. It feels like being right. So I said, "Don't talk to me like that." And Daniel said, "Then talk to me at all." After that, he stayed out more. Spent nights at friends' houses. Took jobs after school. Anything to not be in the same room with me. And I let him. Because it was easier than trying. That's the part people don't say out loud. It is easier to be distant than to be vulnerable. The distance became routine. The routine became normal. And by the time I noticed the hole in our family, it was already shaped like me. Years went by. They graduated. They moved out. Melissa went to college in another state. Daniel joined the military for a few years before settling into construction work. Both of them built lives that didn't require my voice in the room. They came home for holidays in the beginning. Not every holiday, but enough. I'd sit at the table and ask the same questions. How's work? How's school? How's your car running? Practical questions, safe questions. The questions of a man who didn't know how to enter his own children's hearts. Ruth would try to bridge the gap. She'd tell stories. She'd remember the little things. She'd make them laugh. She'd keep the family warm. I was there technically. But warmth doesn't come from proximity. As the years passed, visits got shorter. Calls got less frequent. When they did call, it was often because Ruth was sick, or because they needed information, or because there was something to coordinate. Ruth noticed before I did. She'd say, "Melissa hasn't called in a while." And I'd respond with irritation, like it was an accusation. "Well, she's busy. They've got their own lives." I said it like I didn't care. But I did care. I just didn't want to admit how much. Then Ruth got ill, cancer. Not the kind you ignore. Not the kind you outrun with overtime. The kind that sits down in your living room and tells you your life is about to change. The kids came more often then. They called. They visited, they sat by her bed, they helped with errands. They cooked meals, they made schedules, and I watched them take care of her in a way I never learned how to take care of anyone. It was beautiful. And it was also humiliating. One night, after a particularly hard day, Ruth and I were alone. She was thin, pale, her hair gone, but her eyes were still Ruth's, still sharp, still kind. She took my hand, and her hand felt like paper. She said, "They love you." I didn't answer. She looked at me for a long time and said, very softly, "But they don't know you." Then she closed her eyes, like the conversation was over. That sentence stayed with me more than any other. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. They loved the idea of me. The role. The provider. The father-shaped figure in the background. But they didn't know me, and I didn't know them. After Ruth died, the house became silent in a new way. Not just quiet. Empty. At the funeral, Melissa cried so hard she could barely stand. Daniel held her up, his jaw tight, tears in his eyes. People hugged me. They said, "You're strong." I wasn't strong. I was numb. I didn't know how to be anything else. For a while, the kids called more. They checked on me. They asked if I was eating, if I was sleeping, if I needed anything. And I answered like a stubborn man, "I'm fine." That was my favorite lie. "I'm fine" meant don't come too close. Don't see me. Don't ask me questions I can't answer. Melissa would say, "Dad, you can come stay with us for a bit?" I said, "No, I'm fine." Daniel would offer to handle repairs around the house. I'd say, "I can do it." Even when my hands shook, even when my knees ached, I wanted to preserve dignity. But what I was really preserving was distance. I see that now. The call started to taper off. First weekly, then every couple of weeks, then once a month. Sometimes I didn't even notice at first. Time in old age is strange. Days feel long, but years feel like a blink. You can lose someone slowly without realizing you're losing them. I'd tell myself, I'll call them tomorrow. But tomorrow came with acres, errands, with fatigue. And I'd put it off. I'd tell myself not to bother them. And they did the same. Until eventually neither side reached. I remember the first Christmas I spent alone. I set up a small tree anyway. Not because I wanted to, but because the absence felt too sharp without it. I put up lights on the window. I bought a frozen turkey breast. Because cooking a whole turkey for one man is just sad, I waited that day. I kept the phone close. I even turned the volume up. "Merry Christmas, Dad, love you." Daniel texted, "Merry Christmas." No calls. I stared at those words on the screen for a long time. You'd think I would have called them. You'd think I would have said, "Can I hear your voice?" But I didn't. I sat alone at the table and ate turkey that tasted like cardboard and tried not to feel like I was disappearing. The turning point came later. Not with a dramatic moment. Just a quiet one. I had a fall in the bathroom, slipped, hit my hip, couldn't get up for a while. I lay there on the cold tile, looking at the ceiling vent, listening to my own breathing. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the thought that if I died there, it might take days before anyone found me. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. Eventually I managed to reach the phone. I called Daniel. It rang, and then voicemail. I called Melissa. Same thing. I didn't leave a message. I don't know why. I think part of me still wanted to believe I didn't need them. Finally I called a neighbor. He came, helped me up, took me to urgent care. Later that night Melissa called back. Her voice was tense, worried, yes, but also tired. "Dad, what happened?" I told her. There was silence. Then she said, "Why didn't you call sooner?" I said, "I didn't want to bother you." Another silence, longer. And then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "Dad, you never wanted to bother us when we wanted you." I had no reply. My throat tightened like a fist. My eyes stung. But I didn't cry on the phone. I've never been that kind of man. I don't know if that's strength or just damage. Melissa sighed and said, "I'm glad you're okay." Then she added, "We can't keep doing this." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew. She said, "We've spent our whole lives reaching for you, and you always keep us at arm's length, even now." I wanted to say, I didn't mean to, but meaning isn't what matters. I wanted to say, I was trying. But trying silently doesn't change what people feel, so I said nothing. And that silence was the answer. After that call, I sat in my chair and stared at the dark window. My reflection looked like a stranger, an old man with hollow cheeks and tired eyes, and I finally understood. Not in theory, not as an idea, I understood in my gut. My children didn't stop calling because they were cold. They stopped because calling me felt like touching a door that never opened. They stopped because I trained them to expect nothing. They stopped because they got tired of loving someone who only showed love through duty. And duty, after a while, feels like being managed, not cherished. What can't be fixed now is the years. You can't go back and sit in the school auditorium and watch your daughter sing. You can't go back and throw the baseball with your son before he decided not to ask anymore. You can't go back and choose to sit on the floor for 15 minutes and let your child show you their drawing like it's the most important thing in the world. Can't go back and ask, "How are you really?" and stay long enough to hear the answer. I can apologize now, and I have in clumsy ways. Letters that probably sounded stiff, calls that probably felt awkward. I've told them I love them, but love spoken late is a complicated thing. It's not rejected exactly. It's just it doesn't land where you hope it will, because there's not much space left for it. My children have their own children now. Grandkids I barely know. I've seen them grow through pictures more than through presents. They call me Grandpa because that's what they were taught, not because I'm part of their everyday life. Sometimes Melissa sends a photo, a birthday party, a school play, a family dinner, and I look at it and feel proud, and then I feel a sharp grief because I'm not in it. Not really. And I know that's my doing. If you're listening to me, and you still have time, I don't want to give you advice like I'm some wise old man on a porch. I don't feel wise. I feel late. But I will tell you what I wish someone had shaken into me when I was young. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Paying the bills is not the same as being present. Coming home is not the same as showing up. If you have people who still call you, really call you. If you have children who still want your attention, or parents who still want to hear your voice, don't treat that like it's guaranteed. Don't treat it like it will always be there waiting. Because one day, without anyone announcing it, the last easy call will happen. And after that, every call will feel heavier, more formal, like you're borrowing time instead of living in it. I used to think the big dangers in life were obvious. Accidents, illness, losing your job, losing money. Now I think one of the biggest dangers is simply not noticing what you're losing while you're busy being responsible. I lost my children one small moment at a time. Not with a scream, not with abuse, not with a scam, just with absence, just with not now, just with I'm tired, just with maybe tomorrow. And tomorrow, my friend, tomorrow is a slippery thing. It turns into years without your permission. If this meant something to you, you can leave a comment. Or don't. I'm not here for that. But sometimes it helps to hear that someone else understands, that someone else is trying to do better before it's too late. Because for some of us, it really does become too late. I still sit by the window in the mornings. I still keep the phone charged. I still look at their names sometimes and wonder what I would even say if they answered with warmth again. I'd like to believe I could find the right words now. Old age doesn't give you new chances as often as you think it will. Mostly it gives you clarity. And the clarity is quiet. It doesn't shout. It just sits beside you, like an old friend you ignored for decades, and it says very gently, "This is what you did, so I live with that." I live with the fact that my children didn't stop calling in anger. They stopped calling because the relationship taught them not to expect a father on the other end. And at 85, I finally understand, not because I've become wise, but because there's nothing left to distract me from the truth. The rest of my life will be short. I can feel it. My body tells me in little ways every day. The stairs feel steeper, the nights feel longer, the cold feels sharper, and I don't know how many mornings I have left to sit by this window. But I do know this: when the phone doesn't ring, it isn't because my children are cruel. It's because I was, not with words, not with fists, but with my absence. And absence, after enough years, feels like rejection. That's a lesson I learned far too late. And that's the kind of lesson that doesn't come with a second chance.